Hello and welcome to the Ahaki podcast. My name is Solomon Serwanja and we have another episode yet for you, and I hope you're just enjoying every episode that comes out. The Ahaki podcast looks at the Afrocentric ideology and coins it with our development. Ahaki is a center of excellence that deals with social justice, but with a perspective of Afrocentrism. And we've hosted different guests that are saying, look, as a continent, we have values, we have systems, we have things we believe in, and we need to go back to them. I should also add that, so I'm a PhD student, and we last week had a very, very deep conversation on African epistemology that really was focusing on how when the white colonizers came into Africa, they made our African values to become evil. Like, we had our gods, we had our herbal medicine, we had everything. And when they came and colonized us, they made us believe that what we had was evil and was bad. And we then digressed from what we were as Africans and started to look at the very beliefs and values that we had as evil, which was quite interesting. So it was a deep conversation to an extent that some people don't even want to call their children their African names. And so the person would be Victor Jobs or Solomon Roberts, and these are Africans, and they remove the other Okello or Serwanja or what. So this podcast is supposed to really be taking us back to us as a people, Africa. What do we believe in, and how can we actually benchmark on that to better ourselves? On this episode specifically, I'm really excited to be hosting Salome Nakawesi, who is our Pan-African feminist, and she stands on values of feminism. She has spoken at different global conferences and national conferences, leading conversation on women's rights and leading the women's rights movement. She's been very vocal on issues on women, and I'm really excited that she accepted to come. So today we'll be talking about the infusion of feminism and Africanacity, Afrocentric ideology to feminism. Salome, it's really great to have you, and I'm excited about this conversation as well. Karibu, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So let's start from Salome. You have been in this space. I've seen you and heard you speak very closely and passionately about issues of feminism. Just to my audience that is listening, what is feminism? Sometimes we may perhaps not understand it very well, but there's this thing that feminism or feminists are really putting in: man and woman should be equal, and in bigger parts of Africa that has left mixed reactions. But let's just first of all get grounded in this concept of feminism and the rise of the women movement in Africa. Salome, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and talk about a topic that is very passionate to my heart, because I identify as a Pan-African feminist, and I always tell people I never apologize for two things. Actually, three. I never apologize for the fact that I'm a Black African woman, because for me that is a highly, deeply political conversation where society places me, my body, a female body, my color, and also my race as an African is a deeply political contestation that I'm always fighting and always pushing for the space wherever I am located. Secondly, I never apologize for my politics as a feminist, because feminism has allowed me to understand so many social issues, development issues, political issues. It has enabled me to understand power and how power is manifested, and how powerful and powerless I am, and how powerful and powerless everybody is. So for me, that is an area that I never apologize for, my politics, because feminism allows me to interpret things beyond just the gender frame. Mm-hmm. Interpret social relations. Why are some people have, others do not have? And there I'll look at a particular feminist theory that talks about race, that talks about social class, that talks about different locations. But also feminism allows me to get together with other people, because feminism is a social struggle. It's a social struggle around addressing all forms of inequality, because where there's inequality, you can't have development. So for me, I don't apologize for being a feminist, because it allows me to make sense of why there's so much inequality. Why do we even have words like social inclusion? Ideally, there should be equality. Mm-hmm. Because if you say social inclusion, it means some people are excluded because of so many factors, and some people think they are more powerful than other people. That's why they exclude others. And then also feminism allows me to have an analytical frame Actually, many times, even in WhatsApp groups, somebody sends something that undermines the integrity and personhood of some people. I'll push back. In other words, it is not a class that I study, get a certificate, and say I have a PhD. It is actually a lifetime practice. How I analyze the world, how I communicate, how I engage, So for me, feminism is what? Feminism is a political, economic, social, cultural struggle against all forms of inequality. It is an analysis that problematizes the fact that some people are unequal. It is an analysis that questions power in its very essence, questions things that we've normalized, like hegemonies. What are hegemonies? Hegemonies is the rule of a few people over so many people. Feminism questions that. Feminism questions hierarchies, because whenever you create a hierarchy, it means some people is on top, other people at the bottom. Where I'm coming from as a Black African woman, often I'm lowest in the hierarchy. So for me, it's a deeply political conversation. Even Black African men are lowest in the hierarchy of the world. So for me, it's a deeper contestation around where me and my people are located and what things are given to us, what are deprived of us. So feminism is beyond just the gender frame of male-female. Wow. Feminism is a politic that questions power and how power is manifested. That's why you find feminists in economic spheres, feminists in politics, in the environment, SRHR, because we are questioning power, but also working around substantive equality, because wherever there is inequality, there is oppression and abuse, but also that abuse is normalized. Where feminism began from as a journey was actually challenging gender power, male-female. So move further away from that, because also there's been so many achievements. When you go to the university, anywhere in Africa, most of the graduates actually are female graduates. We've worked hard, actually. We need to celebrate ourselves.
Yeah.
We've empowered a young cohort of girls and women that will not take the nonsense that people in my generation took. Things are not working out. She knows she's more important. Solomon, the kind of daughter you're raising is not a daughter that would make choices like I took in my life, because there's been so much work around some of us being labeled as men haters, some of us being labeled as people who do not like peace, because we are always questioning power. And why do some people hate feminism? I'll come here and say it is problematic to host a panel of men, 5 men. They will say she's disgruntled, she doesn't have enough sex. Those are the things, the labels we are getting. She's a man hater, doesn't have enough sex. For your information, feminists are some of the people that have come to terms with 3 things that create power. Political voice, we're always talking out. Even if I'm the last person talking, I'll talk out.
Wow.
We've come to terms with bodily autonomy and choice and our sexuality. And so when you sit there and say feminists never have sex, I wish you knew we have so much sex, because we've come to terms with our bodies. It is okay to have the body that you have.
We've had some quotas say that feminists cannot survive in marriage. They always, because of pushing for such things, have ended up not getting married, or when they getting married because they want to push for fairness and equality, they have failed in their marriages. And some of them have argued that because of our culture, our cultural backgrounding, that a woman is subordinate to a man. And therefore, that's how God created it, that women be subordinate to your men. But you have African feminists who say your voice needs to be heard. You can talk back to your husband, or you can also fight for your space. And sometimes people look at it differently. I don't know. I'm sure you've had those experiences. I just wanted to top up on what you were saying.
Let me now get onto that. Feminists problematize patriarchal power. Patriarchy is a system of oppression that legitimizes men's control over women, that legitimizes that a boy is more important than a girl, that actually is ingrained so much it is institutionalized in institutional culture, institutions like culture, like religion, like norms and values, like the education system, like the law, like economics, etc. It doesn't run parallel. It is actually deeply woven into any system in which you're operating, even family as a system. In many families, the girls cook the food, but they eat last. And when people talk about African culture, we need to question ourselves. What Africans have done best is that they've merged Jewish customs that come with religion. with British culture because of colonialism, and they call it African culture. African culture has been a culture before we were interrupted by these slave traders, colonialists. They came with education, and with education they put their health care. So they trapped us and colonized us politically. So set in place laws. When you look at all our laws, they're actually laws that are not African. They are laws that are imported from Britain. They are laws that were imported as part of the colonial mechanism. So when we pick all that and say that's African culture, that is a flaw. Actually, that is so abusive to Africans. We need to know who we are. African culture is a culture that's exercised equality before it was interrupted by colonialism. Equality. Because within African culture, I even used to tell people, in African culture, when you sat to eat, they would serve the children first and make sure the children have eaten, and some of these who are dozing, make sure they've eaten. When we were colonized, it is the adults who eat first. In many homes, children are malnourished and their parents all have pot bellies and they're all big.
Basuka kujja konva za mukulu.
Ne bwaba taliiwo, they'll keep that sauce in the fridge for a whole week. And this guy is actually busy eating and drinking in the bars, but the sauce is waiting for them in the house. So, as we are labeling African culture being conservative, we need to go back to the basics. But also, culture is dynamic. This is 2024, Solomon. If we expect a woman of 2024 who, A, is contributing to that homestead, is contributing to the wellness of the family, chances are very high that even you give your husband money because you want him to his ego to be intact, and you want them to treat that like a woman of 1900, then something is wrong with our learning system. We are not learning and adopting. Culture is not static. Culture is dynamic given the times and the realities of the world we live in. So I wouldn't expect in 2024 for us to expect how women were treated before they've attained whatever they've attained, before they've worked towards showing their contribution, which is not just bringing a beautiful body in this relationship. I come with my networks, I make my money, I invest in that, we're raising the children together, we're investing together. Surely, if we are doing things together, what is wrong with us enjoying the rights together?
I hear you, but again, we know that in Africa, a man is a man. A man is supposed to be the leader. While you're pushing for equality, and people have really come out strongly to oppose, not so much of manuals, but even those that are believing in culture, that yes, whilst you have a voice, but the man still remains the head. But the movement has empowered women so much that they even have gone beyond where they're supposed to stop. That they need to listen to their husbands. Their husband is supposed to be a leader. I don't even know sometimes how to put it, but let me put it in my local language. You cannot be having two men in the house. You must have one who is I don't know if it's the word subjective, but temuso akufumba babiri. There must be someone who is going to take leadership. Every time I make a decision, you question it. Every time I'm giving direction, you come. Because you've been empowered by, the women rights movement. You brought that at home. Togambwako, you say the man speaks, you speak back. Because you feel you should be at the same level. I am bringing money, you're also bringing money. Even when you earn more than me, I'm still your husband, and therefore I deserve to be given that respect of being a leader in the home.
That's now where your mental frame and framing of this is problematic. Why? Because you're still thinking. Patriarchy and the system of oppression always equates women to children. And we call it infantilization, thinking that women and girls are children all the time. Patriarchy as a system also burdens men. Just listen to what you just said. I am expected to look after this home. If your wife earns more than you, why should you expect that the husband is on to look after the home? If she's willing to contribute to that home, what is wrong with that?
Then she will be the head in a way.
And there's no reason to say head. That's why we are saying we are working towards substantive equality, because the hierarchies are problematic even at a family level. When you look at families where people have worked towards... So
you believe that we should be at the same level?
There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a competition. It's not a competition. What is wrong with working and walking the journey as partners? Nothing is wrong with that. The challenge we're having is that we are having men in 2024 wanting to get a bit of both cakes. You want to get a woman who is in control of her life, whatever it is, but at the same time you want to treat her as one that is not in control of her life. And that is where, actually for me, in our language, we call it a crisis of masculinities. Men do not know what it means to be a man anymore. Actually, many men went on leave a long time ago. When you're to go, just go and do a survey. Just see in Kira. How many women are buying food, paying school fees, even buying the clothes for their husbands? But these husbands who are struggling with themselves are still thinking that they're the man that was in control of their lives. And yet the economy has transformed in a way that more women are getting into the economy, either formal or informal. And they are learning, and we are teaching them that you must contribute to that relationship. Equal rights come with equal responsibilities. You can't expect to be treated equally, and yet you're not contributing equally to that relationship. And then you expect to treat that person just like she's a rag. And there's a crisis. What is happening actually? There is more violence in relationships because men and boys are struggling to situate themselves. They've been taught, been fed with all that patriarchal notion that a man is on top of things. The reality is that you can have a boy and a girl. They go to the same schools, go to university. Chances are high that the girl will get a job earlier than the boy. The boy is still in the street. When they go out and start working, apparently probably she has gotten a car, a loan and all that. You can't expect them to be at the same level. And this boy is still thinking, I'm ahead of this woman. So what happens? Violence. Because your frame, men and boys are struggling to relocate themselves with the reality of the new gendered world where gender relations keep changing because of the times. And because of some of the successes of the feminist movement, we've worked towards girl child education. We've worked towards pushing people to say, you need to take your girls through the whole cycle, that the end time is not marriage. And actually, I need to go back to what you raised. Not every woman should be married. Marriage is not the highest degree. Some women will be married, others will not be married. Some will be married and be divorced, others will be married and be widowed, and some will not even supposed to marry men. Not everybody is heterosexual. We are diverse.
And that is where many people argue that this is a it's a West-centric campaign that is channeled at damaging the culture of Africans. That it is a movement that began from the West to advance Western values to infiltrate our culture and make things that we used to consider as taboo as normal.
There's nothing that is taboo about sexuality in Africa. Actually, many of the people that have talked openly about sexuality are based on this continent. Why? Because African culture was deeply sexualized. Sex was performing many functions, including pulling together communities that are at war. They would send somebody to marry in that community, including determining a number of things when we plant food, whatever you do. So one of the things that happens is that when people do not want to acknowledge the authenticity of something, they always say it is Western, it is not ours. Women and men in Africa have historically fought oppression. Even when you look at the pre-colonial and the colonial struggles, women and men fought. But history was written by people who thought it's only men. When you look at many of our communities, they had strong women who were queens, who were actually holding. When you look at, for instance, Portuguese Africa, the longest anti-colonial struggle was put up by a woman, Zinga, a queen, who actually pushed Portugal off this continent. Many of these, when you look at all our cultures, there's been experiences of powerful women that are even actually termed as goddesses in many of our African contexts. And then you take on a religion where the role of women is actually subordinate to men. Look at Christianity. Look at Islam. Now, do you see where we're having a crisis of what was happening in Africa? In some African societies, women were maternal, that you'd pick your lineage from your mother's side. Because let's be sincere, you can only be sure about your mother is your mother. We're not sure about our fathers. So that's why patriarchy has to control the female body, because it determines inheritance. It determines who is a true child of this man. That's why our bodies are protected.
All right, but let's just take it a little bit deeper. The rise of the feminist movement and the women's movement in Africa has been on, and it's aggressive. These days, it's very aggressive, especially online. What have been some of those successes that you have achieved as a movement over the last decade?
Yes, I am proudly a product of the women and the feminist movement because as a child, I grew up seeing women that I admired. I would see people like Winnie Byanyima, people like Miriam Matembe, people like Margaret Ziwa, people like Joyce Sebugwao, people like, even from afar, people like Wangari, Maathai. And then one day I said, one day I want to be like those women because they make me understand why I sometimes feel like my body is not good enough for me as a girl. Because, you get those feelings. We are always raised to think we are not enough. So you struggle with imposter syndrome. And also as a young girl, you're always thinking your body is policed in so many ways, but you do not give it that language. So one of the things that I really celebrate that has happened is consistency. If I tell you that where I am now, I am working very hard to make sure I have mentored my daughters to be sure, and my sons to respect gender, not as they are taking away our power, but as something that we need if we are all to survive in this world. I've raised my daughters not to assert themselves. Actually, when they were graduating, I kept telling them, for me, you've graduated, this is a first degree. I expect so much from you. I'm not in a hurry for you to marry. If you want to marry, it's okay. If you do not want, it's also okay. It doesn't change how I feel about you as my child. Because I'm not looking at my children as a Chinese factory supposed to produce grandchildren. If I want children, I still have my uterus, and I can be able to do that. And even if I do not, I know I can surrogate. So those are the things, consistency in terms of this is the politics, but also in terms of saying if you invest in women and girls, if you invest in addressing gender inequality, you're investing in sustaining a whole society. The second thing is around resilience. We've been abused. I don't know how many times I've been abused. We've been abused. We've been witch-hunted. We are men haters. And some of us who are in intimate relationships or marriages, they're always even attacking our husbands, how weak they are as men. But we've stayed resistant. There is nothing that gives me pleasure like such a conversation around feminism and women's rights organizing, because it is something I've experienced from where I didn't know who I am to where I am, and I'm traveling the journey with others. And then another one is around we've invested in mentorship and what I call replenishing the ranks. Through trainings, there's been so much trainings, there's been so much mentoring, there's been so much holding, which men do not do deliberately. As the women's movement in Africa and the feminist movement, we've invested deliberately in mentoring other people. At this point in time, I am holding on two hands of other people. They're holding me, I'm holding them. And the mentorship is not between the old and the younger ones. Even the younger ones are teaching the older ones, this is how you do work. This is how you survive in this new world. This is how we walk the journey together.
And that then has been your strength in the women's movement, because I know, for example, sometimes I host these Twitter spaces online, and whenever I put out a poster, even the friends who I consider friends, I'll give you a very classic example of Maria Alice. She's a strong feminine. Alice. She's my very good friend. So I put out this Twitter space and it has the poster, and she just came aggressive on me. And I was like, I called her, I'm like, woman, what's up? She's like, no, on this thing, I don't compromise. No, I'm a feminist, and that is against the values. And Solo, we put friendship aside. And because you've created that movement, it has become so strong online. Now it's now difficult for me to do any Twitter space without a woman. I have to basically postpone until when I get a woman is when I have to put out that artwork. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is big, this is strong.
Which takes me to my next point. One of the key successes is that we've deepened our politics. We might disagree on so many things, because let me tell you, feminists are not one big basket. We all agree that inequality is unacceptable and we need to address it. But the causes of inequality and how we address that is where we differ. So you find a radical feminist, you find a neo-colonial feminist, you find a feminist who is a liberal feminist, you find a feminist who is believing in environmental justice. So we disagree. Even within ourselves, we have contestations, we disagree. But that doesn't take away from the core purpose of why we're together. So one of the key milestones is that we've deepened our politics. And also we've defined how do we walk the journey together. We have a charter of feminist principles in Africa This is our Bible. We move with it.
You do.
It defines as an individual feminist, I am accountable to myself and others in this way. There are some things that as Solomon I will not do because I'm thinking, people are going to hold me. They're going to pull out the red card, a referee. And then we have principles around organizations. If you're running our organizations, what are the things that you need to be doing? But also as a collective, as a movement. So some of these are around, and then also another thing that we've done is around, we've spread our wings beyond being comfortable in our own homes, our own organizations or countries to Pan-African organizing. Mm-hmm. We have a very strong Pan-African movement called the African Feminist Forum. We have the Uganda Feminist Forum, and each country has its own forum. Jesus and that's Christ. Why you see when you're dealing with a feminist, you're talking to me, I'll know somebody and somebody and somebody and somebody. Why? Because we understand that this work is heavy. You can't do it alone. You need to walk the journey with other people. It burns you out because you're challenging things people knew, but also you're asking people to check their power. That is so disempowering, but also there's so much backlash. I don't know how many times when I was still active, I would be in a radio talk show talking, and then somebody walks in and they want to just slap you. One time I was in Eastern Uganda in Teso. Somebody came in That's and switched. Weird. Yeah, somebody went in, these
local radio station.
They switched off. Another pastor walked into KFM. I was there. They demanded they just want to beat me up. Another one, I was in this monitor radio. What is it called? In Namuongo.
It's KFM.
Some things. So you can't do that work alone because you're asking people to change things they thought they knew, to asking them to address power. But also power is sweet. Let's be sincere. Power is so sweet. And then somebody is telling you that you need to chop some of that power. And when you talk about power, some women also are powerful. They became the men they displaced. I always ask people, why is there a skewed relationship between the madam of the house and the maid? Especially if she hears that my maid had a sexual relationship with my husband. Because society has made her believe she's more powerful and more privileged than the maid because of social class. So patriarchy, the system we challenge, we ask questions around why do we place people in various places? Why are some people having so much, others do not have? Why? That's why you see we are challenging the state, we are challenging the laws, we are challenging the economics. Why is it that the work we do as women is not recognized, but they say a good woman has to cook? What does that mean if a woman can't cook? Or if a man wants to cook?
And it reminds me of Winnie Byanyima, who got a very big backlash when she said women should stop kneeling for their husbands. There's other people have said, women shouldn't cook for their husbands. They're beyond cooking. They're not supposed to kneel down for their husbands. And I remember it was a big conversation online, and they were saying, okay, so this is what our values, this is what our culture stands for. In Buganda specifically, omukyala afukamira n'agamba omwami na munyiga obugere you see, and that is where people have problems. That now you're going to the very core of our very existence and culture as tribes, as things we believe in. You're now saying, women is not about cooking only. But we have grown up knowing that obufumbo kufumba. And gender roles have been defined. So you're redefining gender roles in the movement, feminism movement.
But before you met this woman, what was the purpose? I always ask people. Let's give an example that you're maybe 26, 27. You've been eating for 27 years. And of those 27, chances are high that by 22, you'd left your mother's house. Depending on what you got the purpose for, if you got her to cook for you, then that is okay. But if you got a partner to walk life with, probably if you both want to have children with, to make sense, to invest together, then I do not think your priority will be about whether she nails for you or not. And that's where now I'm taking you back. There is a crisis of masculinities. Men want to have the cake of the new woman. At the same time, they still want to contain that old woman. And that's a challenge. If a woman doesn't lean for you, does that mean she doesn't respect you?
It's a sign of respect.
No. There are many ways. Let me tell you, I'm a woman. There are some people that you kneel for, but you don't even respect at all. You don't even care. Even if they drop dead there, you don't care. And other people you don't kneel for, that you respect. So we need to find out ways in which that fragile male ego, because if you think kneeling for you makes you feel like more of a man, then there's something wrong with that male ego. So we need to work around men's programs and boys' programs so that that fractured male ego is addressed. Otherwise, they will stick on small things like kneeling, which actually may not mean so much. Somebody might respect you a lot without kneeling for you. Somebody might travel with you a lifetime of a journey as a partner. And the kneeling, you don't even recognize that they are not kneeling for you. Me, I always tell people, because I am a Muganda, I would be happy if you kneel for your parents, because there's a level of respect and there's a hierarchy. These are my parents. But then my husband expects me to kneel for them. And then we have to sit and talk about the home bills. Is out of the line, because it means we are partners. But also at the same time, if you're partners, you don't want your partner to be so below you and then you above them. That's not a partnership. So as you're talking about culture, culture transforms. And the symbolism of culture also changes what is important in particular cultures and what works for you. And then number 3, let's not assume that all men actually men that want women to kneel for them. This is an assumption you're making. For you, Solomon, you would want probably your wife to kneel for you. Another man who is even a Muganda will say, no, for me, I do not like that. So let's not lump up all men in one basket, because different people want different things. But also when you look at the younger generation, they actually have debunked all those assumptions that you have. Because for them, they've realized and they've walked in a world where they're realizing that women are beyond just being sex objects or pleasure objects. They're beyond just being a cook to cook for me the house, or beyond just being somebody that I'll abuse with impunity. They're working towards saying, how best can we walk the journey together? And that's why I always tell people, the future of Africa is bright. Why? People like me who are in afternoon of our lives are getting fewer. We're having a younger generation of younger people that are willing to take Africa with its culture to the next future that works for them.
Brings me to my point. In this journey of, the women's rights movement and pushing for feminism, you've encountered a number of challenges. It's been tough, hasn't it? Been quite a very bumpy ride, and yet you remain focused to pushing for equality and going beyond just the gender lens. Challenges and the opportunities ahead.
The bigger challenge is around the stuckness. And I'll not call it negative culture, but I'll call it, there's that, I talked about it as a Pan-Africanist. I see people get elements of what we got from being colonized by Britain under Queen Elizabeth, to Jewish norms of culture, religion, to the colonial mechanism, machinery of the law, and they call it African culture. And it's nowhere near being African culture. Part of that is that stuckness. The second one is around, one of the challenges is around empowerment at a personal level. Sometimes when I was still doing the active role, some woman would call you, oh, I'm being battered, I'm being killed, you go and pick them up. The next day they're thinking, it's you spoiling my marriage. But you're trying to help them at least to live for another day. For their children, you even pick them to take them to their house. You don't even know this person. But you're saying, maybe the children don't need to see violence as they're growing up. So another challenge is about people whose rights that we are pushing for. Looking at this as our struggle. Me always tell people, my life is sorted. I have my property, I have whatever it is. I know my rights. And if I'm to do something and it's abusing me, I'm conscious. This is what it is. And I have a purpose. But many times people whose rights you're pushing for keep thinking it is about you. In other words, rights can only be enjoyed when people who enjoy them know the importance and their self-importance. We grow up girls being told many things. Your body is never good enough. You have bad legs. No one will marry you. So we internalize those noises in our heads that sometimes even if somebody tells you this is good for you, she will take something that is not good for her. And then another challenge is around the state. Many years ago, the government of Uganda was very interested and investing in women. With time, they started getting scared. These women are getting too much.
Yeah, because we've been doing it for a long time.
So there's backlash.
You've left out the boy child.
The backlash is around not even leaving out the boy child. It's about the willingness and political will that has waned. But also, the backlash is around, as we've empowered more women, there's been new forms of challenges. An empowered woman, how do you violate her? Violence. There's so much intimate partner violence and so gruesome. That becomes a challenge. Another challenge is around, we've walked the journey, but not walked the same journey with men and boys. As we've pushed to have more girls and women on top of their game, the men and boys are stuck somewhere. So there's need to have a lot of work around masculinities programs, around male engagement, around understanding that gender equality is not about women. It is about actually easing their burden of responsibility. Me, as where I am, expecting a man to look after me, surely would be too much. Because the things I want are difficult. And if I can afford to get those things for myself, why don't we work around making sure that the men understand that you not being providing for the woman and she can provide for herself is okay. It doesn't dent at all your ego. And that is something we need to work around. But also another challenge that we have is around resourcing. With time, just like you said, it's been on for a long time. Sometimes people are struggling to sustain their own organizations that are doing great work in the communities, which actually takes us back to how we're organizing. One of the bigger challenges we are having is that we have a huge mass of people out there, but some of their politics is not that deep. Just like any social movement, when some people have passed through the trenches, the people who come after them do not see the need to do that. And that one we are realizing with younger people. In all generations, younger people found things easier. They do not know the importance of consolidating. So the challenge is around consolidating the gains. Another challenge we're having is a new manifestation of opposition towards women's rights, anti-gender movements. And these ones have merged with the state.
The pushback and a deliberate effort to push back against feminism.
Yes, against rights in their entirety, against SRHR, against women's rights. And they're so politically connected all the way from the UN, whatever it is, the state. In governments, they've merged up and they're with parliaments. So we are seeing many parliaments passing laws that are actually anti-gender, laws that actually undermine the very essence of the human rights principles. And these ones are highly resourced. They're funding electoral campaigns in Africa. So that's why you see Africa is on fire everywhere. So these are some of the challenges that really we struggle with. Another challenge is around...
And sometimes you call them opposition.
We call them opposition. Right-wing opposition. But we are there. We are ready.
What does the future look like for feminism in Africa?
The future is bright. Why? We've invested in building a critical mass. The future is also bright because there are many men who are happily identifying as feminists.
I find that very interesting.
Yes, because feminism is an analysis. Feminism is a politic. Feminism is how you see the world. Feminism is how you work towards addressing inequality. It's not about the body that you're holding. In my personal experience, some of the oppression I've received was actually not even by men. Because with men, I know how to deal with that. It's by women. And some of them identifying as feminists. So feminism is a struggle that men and women can equally contribute to. And I know many men struggle with the word feminism. It shows that I'm feminine. No, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a politic. So feminism, men have walked the journey, men have contributed, women have contributed. So it is because we're talking about a gendered world where we're all contributing to it. And to address, we are all part of the problem. We should all be part of the solution. And of course, that doesn't mean that you come and take women's space. Because we've seen some people who, it's like crying more than the bereaved. You don't cry more than the bereaved. Because also men have privilege. When you grow up as a boy, you have privilege. You don't know you don't have privilege. So you need to be conscious on at what point which stones do I step on? Where do I allow the people that are more affected to take the lead and I'm supporting? And where can I take the lead and they're supporting? There has to be, and that's what in feminist language we're calling being cautious of your own power, how it empowers and how it disempowers other people.
Wow. You speak so very passionately about this women's movement. Where do we go from here?
Where we're going, is to allow the women's movement to allow itself to get into the future. Where is the future? The future is, for me, is around 3 or 4 things. First of all, the future is around digitalization. We can't continue to do the work we do in the old models of work. Why? Because we are seeing a bigger push, especially here in Africa. Ideally, this would have been a workshop or a seminar, but we are doing it as a podcast. So the future is around being in sync with ICTs and digitalization and the opportunities that you can harness from that. The second one is allowing the movement itself to start understanding the nexus between emerging issues, climate justice, water. I always tell people water is the new gold. It's not even gold or oil. Fresh water is the new battlefront of the world. Emerging issues like reenacting Africanization, being comfortable with who we are, defining development for ourselves. And then also another emerging issue is around the young population. What do we do with this young population? They're not going to organize the way we organized. I always go to train young people. They don't even have a notebook or pen, but they're writing their notes on their phone. The future is around being strategic, but also the future is around learning, when do you work with the government? When do you contest? Because gone are the times when we are challenging everything and fighting. There are certain times that you need to sit together and say, this is our country. This is the future we want. How do we walk the journey together? And then where you disagree, to disagree honorably.
Have you also brought on board cultural and religious leaders? Because I think it's a very big
I am coming
pushback.
there. And then another part of the future is to identify what I call norm shift actors. These are the people that define norms in society. Religious leaders, cultural leaders, opinion leaders. You know, in some villages, somebody doesn't have any formal position, but their opinion matters to everybody. So identifying those and having a deeper and soul-to-soul conversation. What does it mean to have empowered women and girls? What does it mean? It doesn't challenge culture at all. Actually, it allows us to deepen our culture, but even also move it from one generation to another, so that our young people don't run away from their culture because they don't relate with it. So we need that kind of conversation. I have to say, that's one of the challenges we faced. Having a consistent conversation with these institutions, not individuals,
But institutions.
the institutions, because these institutions have convening power. But also when you look at the average African, we are a mix of everything. I am a Muganda, I am a woman, I am an Anglican, I am, so how do we blend that? So that you don't think you're going to pursue just one of those identities. We have multiple identities, and that's what feminism tells us, that we have multiple identities as people. As a woman, I am someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's whatever it is. How do you balance those multiple identities of these people so that they don't feel like they are disengaged? And then, of course, the future relies on us as Africans, pulling our energies together again.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the global world, power lies on people who are similar, getting their energies together and harmonizing that. I travel a lot and I get so disturbed when an African country is asking me for a visa. We need to move ourselves beyond that. Those are colonial mechanizations. As Africans, we need to work around the barriers that stop us from walking the journey together.
Yeah.
As African feminists, we've tried, but sometimes even convening is difficult. We actually have to convene in a country where we know they're not going to ask people for visas. So how do we work around the things that separate us? Around who colonized who, around all these regional fights that actually around resources, around the male ego of our African male leaders, because most presidents in Africa are men. Mm-hmm. But even around having an African Union that is really a union.
Exactly, and that's where I was coming, that you've now taken the ball beyond just individual countries. You want to make it like a big continental conversation, and that women and feminists need to have a seat at where decisions are made at the African Union and at East African Legislative Assembly or EALA or whatever, or in SADC on these different individual groups. I see that there's a zeal from feminists to be on the table where decisions are made.
Yes, why? Because when you look at the charter, the AU Charter, 1981, women are equal citizens of this continent. Where decisions are taken, we don't have to scream through the windows. Because we are the mothers of this continent, we are the wives of this continent, we are the people that really love this continent. You can't say you're going to deliberate about their issues when they are away. There's nothing wrong with sharing that space because it's their lives and realities that we bring to the table. But also all these regional economic blocks, they have charters. For instance, SADC has a SADC, they have their own treaty, but even also a SADC gender charter that really actually talks about 50-50. East African Community, our treaty, East African Community Treaty is very clear. So it is not actually asking too much. It is implementing what we committed to do and what we committed ourselves to. One of the achievements that you can't delink the women and the feminist movement from the growth of other movements. Mm. When you look at the trajectory of growth of, for instance, the labor rights movement, its deeper roots is with women who felt that they were not paid enough compared to the same amount of work as men. When you look at the SRHR movement, it's a baby of the women's rights movement because we did everything. Women were elected, were in politics, but then you can't control anything when you don't control your body.
You've really been on the front line of pushing for sexual reproductive health and rights.
And rights.
That one is very, very vividly seen.
Because also it's one of the last bastions of oppression. And then when you look at the LGBTIQ movement, because feminists believe that we are all equal, but also they believe that there is diversity. While as Solomon might be attracted to men, somebody else is not attracted to anybody, and it is okay. That doesn't reduce their humanhood. When you to look at the sex work movement, I always tell people, I look at bride price as a form of sex work. Why? Why are people paying for? What do people sit? They even give a date. February has 29 days. And then you say 27th February is when we are meeting at this home. What are you debating about? Debating somebody who controls that woman's body and sex and pleasure. So we've been part of that movement. We've been part of movements around push towards environmental justice, towards other issues. So the women's movement, I can proudly say we've worked around that. And then, of course, lastly, sustaining our work. When you look at many of the old organizations, they now tell you, you find me at address so and so, and it is the address you're going to find me even in 20 years. So really sustaining our work. It shows that we didn't come just to tick a box, but we look at how do we address inequality in the longer term.
Wow, what a detailed conversation this has been. I've been hosting Solomon Nakawisi, who is a Pan-African feminist. You could see it in her eyes, in her expression. She's so passionate about feminism. The feminist movement across Africa is growing every single day, and they're pushing back against what they believe is unfair. And they have, of course, faced very, very stiff pushback from different quarters, including religion and culture. And that conversation still continues. What do you think? Your views, your opinions, your thoughts matter. So just go ahead and make a comment or two, and we'll appreciate to hear from you. I'm Solomon Serwanja, and this has been one of the episodes of the Ahaki podcast that we're really looking at Afrocentric ideology and promoting social justice. Until next time, I cannot wait to have you again for another podcast.